Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Better Satellite World, the podcast of Space and Satellite Professionals International. I'm Lou Zaccarella. Today, we continue with our series, Space for All, an exploration into how diversity and the expansion of human possibility and thought are shaping the commercial space industry. This season's Space for All series is sponsored by Hughes Network Systems. Powering the networks on which people everywhere depend, Hughes celebrates 50 years of innovation this year in 2021. Congratulations to our friends at Hughes. You can learn more at hughes.com. The Better Satellite World podcast is also supported by the corporate partners of SSPI, EchoStar Hughes, the law firm of K&L Gates, and Access Intelligence, publishers of Via Satellite Magazine and producers of Satellite 2021 in September at National Harbor, Maryland. Additional support comes from the 3,000 members of SSPI and its chapters worldwide. Thank you, SSPI. Well, we all know the word and general concept of regulation, and most of us in the space and satellite industry realize that it is designed conceptually to reduce risk, enable corporate, national, or community success, and allow us to operate under equal and fair principles of law. But is that how it is working? Or have regulatory frameworks from the past reduced the opportunities for startups, minorities, and new forms of satellites and technologies that, once unleashed, could be game changers in our individual and collective goals and quests? And who regulates the regulators? Well, one of our guests today posed these questions during our Leadership in Turbulent Times webinars, and so we invited him here to the Better Satellite World to explain himself and to help us take a look at this issue. George V. John was drawn to the industry from a sense of frustration with the insufficient connectivity available to his family in India. His path led him to the conclusion that satellites can meaningfully close the digital divide. Well, today, Mr. John is an advocate and an associate with the progressive and prestigious law firm of Hogan Lovells, where he works with companies to help them obtain licenses from regulators. During his young career, he has led advocacy efforts to the US Congress and has a view about regulation in our current expansive climate, which he's going to share. Of note, Mr. John was named one of the industry's 20 under 35 by the SSPI, and we welcome him. On the entrepreneurial side, Sanjay Nekkanti is the founder and CEO of Dhruva Space. You've probably heard of them. Dhruva is engaged in the development of small satellites for the commercial, government, and academic markets. The company builds application-agnostic small satellite platforms, and Sanjay's vision is to offer small satellites coupled with Earth stations and launch services as an integrated package for customers in industries that include biodiversity and agriculture and many others. Mr. Nekkanti is also one of the founders of SSPI's India chapter, and we welcome him. Well, those of you who heard our recent webinar with the US-India Business Council will remember seeing Ms. Kathryn Martin. Kathryn oversees spectrum and service rights at Access Partnership, one of the world's leading public policy firms dedicated to opening markets for technology. So she is eminently qualified to talk to this topic, and we found some time on her busy schedule and invited her back. So welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Lou. Hello. Hello, everyone.
Thank you, Lou, and hello.
Let's start in. Regulations and regulators generally exist, as I said, to enable a startup company, say, or an industry to thrive. So as each of you look at the regulatory environment for what we'll call new space, generally first, what are you seeing? Kathryn, let's start with you.
Thank you, Lou. What I see is a lot of innovation, investment, excitement, and potential in the space industry. I mean, clearly over the past several years, we have seen very ambitious and wide-ranging, exciting projects that have come to the fore. And it really is, I guess I feel like we're standing at the precipice of a whole new era in space technology, communications, and opportunity. And I see a lot of people kind of figuring out, well, what does this mean for us all? And from a regulatory point of view, I think it's just bringing a lot of challenges. What we're seeing on the NGSO side with like not just incredibly large constellations, it poses some challenges. We see this with some of the other types of, I guess, small satellites. What does that mean when you have small networks that take months to launch? How does that impact the regulatory framework when people until recently assumed it would take years to launch and to operate a satellite network? So I see excitement, but I also see challenges.
Kathryn, just quickly on that. When you talk about challenges, am I right in thinking that among those challenges are the fact that you just described a sort of a whole new world for those of us who have been in the industry a long time? Are among the challenges regulatory, that they just quite haven't caught up?
I think so, and I don't want to make it seem like regulation or regulators are behind or asleep at a switch or anything. I think it's simply that the regulatory framework that was envisioned for, effectively, let's just say a geosatellite environment has just evolved, right? We have many NGSO networks now, sure, but what we're looking at include constellations with thousands of satellites, or satellite constellations with tiny satellites. And in terms of the process that had been established for filing your network, coordinating it with the ITU, seeking authority to launch and operate, working in the international community, it just sort of assumed that your constellation would be, the default was sort of geosynchronous, if that, and it would be, it would take several years, you would have 7 years to bring it into use, and it would be a certain size, and chances are, that was sort of the default. And in many ways, we've just moved beyond it, and people are still trying to figure out, well, what does that really mean? If I have a small satellite network and I'm a university and I launch it, what I was supposed to coordinate?
Right.
It's just different.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think you've described it well and set it up nicely. George, sounds like a lot of work for lawyers. That's a good thing, but as I said, I blame you for this, because you were sort of meditating on this during your panel in our Leadership in Turbulent Times. How are you looking at this environment? Are the regulations outdated? Is there not space for all at the moment?
Yes, I would agree. Regulations are outdated or even non-existent, because if we think about it, the regime was created primarily during the Cold War. Technologies, various parties involved have all changed and evolved. And with that, I will say administrations have been responsive to industry, and they've been making serious efforts to modernize, streamline, create regulations that'll help propel this industry forward. So we can see that, I look at the US, UK, Luxembourg, Germany, France, New Zealand, a number of these companies administrations have gone forward and changed the processing of their applications. So if you meet certain criteria, you'll get expedited processing. They've looked at things like, how are we going to reduce our application fees or annual regulatory fees so it's reasonable to court different operators here and for them to be sustainably operating within our jurisdiction. Other things that Kathryn has hinted on: frequency allocation and coordination of RF spectrum. Orbital debris mitigation is a big issue and something I believe we'll be talking about later. And how our systems with cameras on board, how are they regulated? Previously, a lot of administrations didn't even care about it. Now they realize, hey, it might be very sensitive to what we have going on within our own jurisdiction, our country's borders, and outside of it. And so you see that national administrations have really taken that approach. And then internationally, there have been organizations that have been looking to modernize this regime. So we have the International Telecommunication Union, which is trying to update these regulatory processes. They made sense for, as Kathryn said, GSO systems that take years to develop and years to launch, and they operate for 15 years typically or more. But then you have these new CubeSat platforms that Sanjay is developing. And they can be developed within a few weeks and launched within a few months, and they only operate for less than a year. So does a 7-year bringing into use period for notification purposes or even filing ITU filings even make sense? Those are the types of questions that the ITU is tackling. And then outside of international, the last thing I'll touch on is non-governmental efforts. We realize as industry that, hey, this could really run off the rails quickly if governments just impose new regulations and don't totally appreciate or understand what the impact might be. And so we have industry-led best practices that have evolved. I look at groups like the Space Safety Coalition or different trade associations, such as the Satellite Industry Association, and they've developed everything from remote sensing to RF spectrum use, and you name it. They've laid the groundwork, and they would prefer that these best practices are the rules of the road rather than some stringent prescriptive regulation. And that's something we could talk about later too.
Yeah, just quickly on that, as you were speaking, I was thinking about our industry, and again, it is a truly global industry. It always has been. It always, just by its very nature, it has to be, right? We're out in space. I mean, we're covering the globe. For those of you who are not necessarily in the industry, when they talk about GSOs or GEOs, they're talking about geostationary satellites, which are in synchronous orbit with the Earth. They were sort of for many years the only types of satellites. But George, our industry is an international one. It has been, as I said, always will be. Does that give us an advantage in moving forward with some of the regulations because we know how to collaborate?
Yes, it's an advantage because from the operator side, you have folks from many different administrations trying to work together to create a sustainable way forward. But the issue becomes, okay, the United States wants to do orbital debris mitigation in a certain way. They want to create indemnification, potentially impose insurance rules. So that way, if you create a mess in space, aka you create debris and it starts crashing into other things, you should be liable for it. Okay, that makes sense if the US adopts it. What if the rest of the world doesn't adopt it? What incentive do companies have to continue licensing through the US? They'll move elsewhere. And I find that there is no real international organization, at least on that front, that is cohesively trying to address these issues. I think everyone generally understands that orbital debris could be a big issue, and it takes more than just a few administrations to address it. And so to a certain degree, yes, there is support internationally. It's easy to coalesce among operators, but for administrations to all coalesce, that's a more difficult question. It's some of the issues that we're trying to tackle.
Yeah, politics, to borrow a phrase, are still local, so to speak, right? They're still national. So it may not always be the case that the industry can sort of break out of its cocoon to do the types of things you're talking about with issues like that. So that's a really good point. Well, Sanjay, you're where, as they say, the rubber meets the road. You've been working on your business model and your business for, I think, about 8 years now, beginning to be eminently successful. And you're working in a country, India, which is highly regulated in certain areas. As you now look around the world at this issue, how have you experienced the regulatory environment, and how did it inhibit your ability to succeed or not?
So I think regulations are becoming more and more driven by local ecosystems. I think when we started off in 2012 in India, the policies that we were looking at were all written in the 80s and 90s. But over the years, I think in general, the ecosystems have been evolving more and more. Global operators are getting into the satellite business. So I think, the local regulator in India has also started to think about how to nurture the ecosystem here and make make satellites accessible to 1 billion users. So I think the active steps are happening right now. For example, ISRO had opened doors last year, and the guidelines were very unclear. But what they have been doing is they've been engaging with the industry. They've not just from an Indian context, but with global space players, and they're tweaking to make satellites really accessible to 1 billion users in India.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kathryn, in order for that kind of thing to happen, there has to be, the intersection between what you do, access partnership, and the provider and the regulator. And what you do is so important. What is the intersection between recommending a new technology to a company and knowing that it has a reasonable chance to be successful based on regulations? How do you navigate that?
Thanks. That's a good question. In some ways, we would sort of approach new technologies to try and better understand exactly what aspects of it are actually new, and where and how could and should the existing framework be tweaked to enable it. Is it a different frequency band? Is it a different form of movement on the behalf of the user? Are they, are they like Earth stations in motion, for example? Or is it, terminals that are crossing borders? Or is it a new type of service? Like, is it an internet service where perhaps in the past it had been more video or voice or something, broadcasting or something? You kind of look at the technology and you sort of see exactly what is it aspiring to do and how might that impact the existing regulations. And then you look to see what tools there are, what changes might be needed. Is it a new frequency band? Are there restrictions on the existing use of the frequencies? Are there restrictions on how the services can be deployed? Who can deploy it? Who can in a particular country operate it? And so a lot of times we will work with our clients to develop a strategy, if you will. It might start with the global level to see what's authorized and what's able at this point. And then we will also look at the regional level, because a lot of times you'll find in different regions, within Europe or Africa, CETEL, they'll have harmonized approaches, standards for different types of technologies. And then
on a regional basis.
On a regional basis, yeah. And then last but not least, maybe not last, but we'll also do an analysis of the target markets to see if, in fact, it is possible to roll out that type of service in a particular country. And if it's currently allowed, if it isn't allowed, who are the key players currently that you could partner with, or that, could offer the services, or, are there any challenges and barriers at this point to enabling you to offer the service? So it's pretty, it's pretty exciting.
It really is. It really is. And again, behind all of that, you're growing these economies. In these regions, in these places, right? I mean, that's
midwifing them, yes.
Midwifing the economy. Put that on your resume. I'd like to see that.
I don't know if I get many calls, but yeah.
But it's really important, right? You're bringing new things into the world. George, when we talk about new technologies, entirely new vertical sectors, you can't avoid the conversation in this business about LEO fleets. So when we talk about the new constellations, in particular the LEOs, where do the current regulations help? Where do they not help? Where do you see LEO falling into all of this?
So the regulations certainly help ensure a safe and sustainable space environment to avoid the orbital debris issues that we talked about. The proliferation of constellations that have satellites in the numbers of tens of thousands, that's really important. And if they're all going to be neighboring similar orbits, we need to ensure that those systems are operating in a sustainable manner. The other thing that regulations help is they protect your particular service from harmful interference from other radio frequency sources. Mm-hmm. They provide certainty to prospective applicants that are interested in particular frequency bands or a particular type of service. They also protect the investment-backed expectations of existing licensed operators. And so there's a lot that the regulations do help, especially with these LEO fleets. And as systems that were proposed in 2016, 2017 evolve, how do their systems and their rights within certain frequency bands, do they continue to maintain status as like the lead in the processing round from 2016, 2017, or do they get relegated to a lesser status because they filed a modification, their system has changed in 2020? These are the types of questions that regulations help address. Where I find that the regulations, ones that are either being considered or that are in place, they're, may lack or fail to totally address the issues in a comprehensive manner, is rules that I call that are one size fits all or too prescriptive. And so what do I mean by that? We have the word LEO fleet, but a LEO fleet could be tens of thousands of satellites at 1,000 kilometers, and they're providing broadband internet. And then you have maybe a constellation of 30 to 50 satellites at 500 kilometers, and it's providing Earth imaging. And just inherently, they have different concepts of operations, they have different orbital debris profiles, the systems are totally different.
Different business models, yeah.
And I think administrations are coming to this realization that, hey, maybe rules that we're imposing are very focused on the bigger systems. The press covers SpaceX, OneWeb, Amazon. And sure, they help address a lot of those issues, but if you're addressing those issues, they might not actually adequately address the issues that some of these smaller constellations are facing. And so one example I go back to orbital debris. A system with thousands of satellites above 1,000 kilometers, if there are orbital debris causing events there, that debris sits up at 1,000 kilometers. Given the number of satellites, it's going to be a ton of debris. Compare that with 500 kilometers and maybe 50 satellites or 100 satellites of CubeSats. Their orbital debris impact, if they crash into each other, is by just pure numbers, going to be fewer pieces of debris up in orbit. But because they're at 500 kilometers, that debris is going to deorbit within 15, 20, 25 years, as opposed to that debris at above 1,000 kilometers that's going to stay up there for potentially centuries.
Right.
So does it make sense for that constellation above 1,000 kilometers to have the same regulation as one at 500 kilometers? I'm unsure, but that's something where the regulations and maybe lacking in certain places. And then the last part of all this is we have regulations that help, that may not help. And then there's also another issue of absence of regulations. And so what do I mean by that? There are issues with transparency, like who has actually filed in certain countries. And, even if they did file here in the US, for example, what are the different timelines for processing? Like, does the FCC have to adjudicate and finalize a license grant within a year? That's not necessarily the case. There are no rules on that. So an application could just sit in a vacuum and you really have no idea what's going on. The public has no idea and the operator, the applicant, has no idea, and you don't know how to resolve whatever issues might be holding it up. And so to increase the transparency and certainty they can provide to investors and operators generally, filling that void of absence of regulation is also important.
Yeah, those are really good points, and the idea of having flexibility in the view toward regulations, not, as you say, prescriptive, is a key one. I want to come back later to talk about where Hogan, Lovells and a law firm like yours, can have an impact on unleashing companies, like Sanjay's, so that again we can get more economic activity going in an industry that's growing. Sanjay, as you're listening to George, I'm sure you're having thoughts and relate a lot to what he says. You were part of a team that nearly 10 years ago built India's first private satellite, as I recall. And then you founded Dhruva with a vision to continue to take advantage of what hopefully was more privatization of the industry in India. What has been the course of regulations there that, to George's point, has helped or set back the effort, or whether there's been this inertia that frustrates an entrepreneur like you?
Yeah. For the first satellite, when we wanted to launch it, when we spoke to investors to raise capital, most of the investors said, hey, in a country with 1 billion people, we've never seen anybody launch a satellite privately and operate it. Is it even possible for you guys to do it? Is the government going to support you? So on and so forth. So, way back in 2005, 2006, I think ISRO had the Indian Space Research Organization had supported a small wireless communication group to help them build and launch an amateur radio satellite. So initially, we took that route of requesting ISRO or the regulator to see if we can launch an amateur radio satellite. So, and that was the building block for us to initiate a whole set of activities in the private sector here. One thing lead to the other, and now government is formulating rules that enables people to use spectrum efficiently. All over the world, especially low Earth orbiting satellites, most of them have used amateur radio bands. Which is not really being used for amateur radio applications. People are using it for tech demos, etc. So now I think regulators have identified these loops, and they are taking corrective measures where experimental licenses can be issued for earth to space, space to space, or space to earth links. And these are if you look at the ITU regulations, there are these frequencies are clearly listed out there. So it's more about the regulator to look at are there any interference issues that might come up, etc., and then create a framework for the local ecosystems to use that. And I believe that regulators around the world are taking corrective measures to enable more people to get into space.
You do believe that? So you're seeing, enlightened sort of regulators who really understand this. Can I summarize that?
Yeah, absolutely, Lou. I think what I am seeing is that regulators are now having more and more interactions with the industry and trying to act as an enabler than stopping entrepreneurs from doing what they want to do.
Very good. And of course, we entrepreneurs like that. Kathryn, just to sort of stay on the technology subject to unleash entrepreneurship, in that SSPI and U.S. India Business Council webinar that I referred to, you described how India is approaching IoT and how it might be one of the areas where it can open up its satellite market further. Just sort of to take it out more broadly, globally, can you describe why IoT, for example, would be the technology or application where this might occur, where this opening up an expansion of technologies and businesses might be unleashed?
Sure, definitely. I guess separate and apart from the growth and explosion in space and satellite services is just simply the Internet of Things, machine to machine connectivity is witnessing its own evolution, if you will. And to be able to marry the two, whereby satellite platforms are used to support and enable Internet of Things or machine to beam technologies, I think it's kind of a natural fit. I mean, it's been happening for a while in low narrowband services. Like I think Iridium had offered some fleet tracking and other types of services. So I think there is definitely a natural fit there. But in terms of a service that might be ideal for enabling India or other markets to use it to kind of broaden their pool of operators, or the ability to offer foreign operators' ability to offer services within their country, I think is good. And India had released a consultation for input. I believe the deadline is tomorrow, April 9th, for comments on a variety of the considerations, ranging on, narrowband IoT services. And I think it's, I think it's beneficial. I know there are a lot of satellite operators, looking to offer services in that field.
Is something like that an entree point, a sort of a wedge where you can then move a lot of other technologies because you've begun to establish sort of ground rules or momentum for technologies and entrepreneurs to come in?
I believe so. It's the type of service that I won't say camel under the nose into the camel's tent or camel's nose into the tin, but it is like, it is kind of an entree wedge service. It's not as large or perhaps as threatening and as like ISP or mobile terrestrial services or something. So
yeah, not as threatening. That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah,
that's how I was thinking.
That's my view. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of intuitively it sounds right. George, Sanjay sort of gave us a ray of hope talking about, what I refer to as enlightened regulators, people, who are perhaps a new generation of people in disciplines like yours and regulatory regimes and others who look at the needs of the economy and the industry differently. As you look at the regulatory landscape, would you agree, first of all, and where would a firm like yours make the most impact? Again, we're talking about an impact in expanding this great industry.
Yeah, part of what Sanjay was saying is governments are becoming more accommodating and responsive to industry because they view that industry can probably do this much more efficiently and cost effectively than government can. They can enhance our spacefaring leadership among the world. And so what a firm like Hogan Lovells can do is, I think, I'll break it into regulators and public, what we can do for them, and then what we can do for operators. For the regulators and public is what we were talking about. How can we educate them on the technologies, how they've evolved from what they may have heard or don't even know about at all? And what are other administrations or international bodies or those industry-like groups, what are they doing to create new rules, update rules, or establish best practices? And to do this in a manner that isn't just like a regulator. As a law firm, we can help synthesize and put that into just layman's terms, because let's be real, what startup or what new space company really wants to be parsing through all that? No one. So I think we have a unique opportunity to help there. And another thing that Hogan Lovells has been really at the forefront is how can we create a platform or a avenue for regulators to communicate with operators and just the industry at large without having to go through the formal governmental avenues. And so we have been holding coordination meetings on behalf of the Commercial Smallsat Spectrum Management Association. And so we'll have everyone from DoD to FCC, NTIA, NOAA, NWS, you name the acronym, we have them there, and they are working directly with the operators and trying to figure out, hey, how can we get our systems to work together? And that kind of conversation doesn't really ever happen. And for them to agree to come to an informal setting and to help advise operators before they even start system design or before they file an application, even during the application process, I think that's something very unique. And so that's the regulators and public. On the operators side, we help connect what I call space success triangle. Everyone focuses on two parts of the triangle: the investment and trying to gain a ton of money for the company to help perfect that technology. That's the second part of the triangle. And so the third part, and if you want to succeed, is you need to be able to navigate regulations and whatever technical challenges they may promote. So we are able to, I guess what has happened is the firm really recognized that the space industry has robust growth occurring. And so they assembled a team of attorneys that focus on everything from RF to commercial launch, remote sensing, government contracts, you name it, but they're all very focused on the space industry. Mm-hmm. To have a one-stop shop that folks could go to, I think that's very important. And so they don't need to have a piecemeal type approach. and what else is really neat about Hogan Lovells is that it does have almost 50 plus offices around the world. So if I can't help you, there are likely my counterparts that can help you elsewhere. And so that's where we help connect the circles or triangles, whatever shape you want to put out there, and close the business case for all these companies, which really does involve that regulatory aspect.
Yep, and of course that's the geometry that everybody likes. More businesses, more industry, and the sense of collaboration that you described, I think I think it's wonderful and necessary. You have to have that kind of dialogue, and I think the more you have of it, the more success you have. So that is.
I'm with you on that, because it goes back to my point earlier, where maybe absence of regulations or where regulations may be failing is that transparency aspect. You submit something, you have no idea where it goes. But if you're able to have some of these informal dialogues, you at least know who your counterparts are, what their issues are, and you can work through to coordinate and resolve that issue. That was not the case for many years. And so slow progress, but we're making progress.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And nature does abhor a vacuum. And, we know that cliche to be true. Hey, we're at the end here, unfortunately, but, speaking of collaboration and getting together to communicate all of these ideas and things, I have to ask you each just very briefly, quick answers. When we come out of COVID, because we're at April 8th here, 2021, so we still are experiencing COVID in most parts of the world. What are you most looking forward to in terms of collaborating, or just overall when we get out of COVID? Kathryn, you first.
I'm smiling. I know you can't see it, but I am smiling.
I can hear it.
Once we get out of COVID, I am looking forward to kind of that collaboration that George mentioned. It will be really nice to actually have face-to-face meetings where we can work through issues. Right now, I'm thinking on the ITU front. There's a lot of work and studies and debating and negotiation that needs to take place in advance of Work 23. But I think it'll just be good to see our international colleagues again and to really kind of work through some issues. Everybody, while we all love Zoom and the other platforms, it's still not a complete substitute for face-to-face. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm starting to love it a lot less. You're right. Sanjay, how about you?
I think the future is bright, Lou. I believe in the coming decade, we will be going back to the moon. I think collaboration will play a very important role. I think, as Dhruva, we would like to have, teams across borders collaborate and build missions together that would take humans beyond Earth.
Yeah, very good. And that is the space and satellite industry way. So it's part of our legacy. It won't be anything new. George, last word to you. As I said, I blame you for bringing this panel together. So what's going to happen when we get out of COVID? And thank you for doing all of that.
I'm happy. I have plenty more ideas that we can talk offline for future panels. There are two things I'm looking most forward to. The one is what Kathryn hit on: collaborating in person. It just makes a world of a difference. We've discussed it's inherently just an international type of processes, people involved, different types of systems, different languages. And so to be able to be in the same room and to even have offline type conversations makes a world of difference to understand what the regulator wants and what operators want. And another thing that I'm looking forward to is what the investment landscape will truly look like and what companies will succeed. It's been interesting. The money hasn't really dried up during COVID. And so these companies will now have to actually follow through after COVID. And so will we continue seeing these SPAC deals or IPOs, or will companies actually not, or are they going to achieve, or are they not going to achieve the revenue estimates? That'll be interesting to watch.
Yes, that's a great point. Executing on the business plan. What a new idea, huh? But they have to do it. I love the cover of the recent Space News magazine. It said, "Is there space without SPAC?" So I think you're onto something there. Well, listen, you know, each of you are contributing significantly. We don't know exactly what new space even means, but we know that it is an expansion of our industry, more opportunities for all, and even greater involvement in the global economy, thanks to the things that we do. And you all contribute to it mightily through your efforts. So thanks so much for making the time here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lou.
Thanks, team.
And that wraps up our conversation with George John, Kathryn Martin, and Sanjay Nekkanti. I thank them again for spending so much time with us today in such an interesting conversation. For more information on Hogan Lovells, visit hoganlovells.com. That's Hogan Lovells, Lovells.com. For more information on Access Partnerships, see accesspartnership.com. And by the way, they've come out with a new report called FinTech Growth in Emerging Markets. And among the tips in that report, Kathryn will know well, is track enabling regulation. Sound familiar? And for more information on Dhruva Space, go to dhruvaspace.com. That's DHRUVA space.com. Thanks once again to Hughes Network Systems for their support for this series. We can't do it without you. Stay tuned next Monday for another episode. SSPI is the voice of the space and satellite professional. We connect the people of the indispensable industry that makes the world better every single minute of the day. To learn more about our Better Satellite World campaign and to underwrite a series if you'd like, go to bettersatelliteworld.com. And if you're not a member of SSPI and would like to know more, go to sspi.org. If you're a student, your membership is free. And follow us on Twitter at SSPI and check us out on LinkedIn and Facebook. For Space and Satellite Professionals International and our producer, Ana Gomez, I'm Lou Zaccarella. Let's make it a better satellite world. Take care, everybody.